next panel this afternoon is going to be Policy in Practice, Overcoming the Latest Challenges Operators Face. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Liz Reynolds, our moderator of this panel, to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. Love to always come back to Tulip, to this fantastic location and this fantastic energy in this place. For those who don't know me, I am a lecturer at MIT and more recently came out of the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Manufacturing and Economic Development last fall. And I can tell you it's been, and I think it's not just because I was part of the administration, this is a very exciting time for advanced manufacturing in this country. We have a lot of change technologically that's allowing us to move into new directions in 21st century manufacturing, all of which is represented here. We have clear changes in the way in which manufacturing is being organized globally, whether that's because of supply chain resilience, geopolitical reasons, pandemics, but people rethinking how they're organizing their manufacturing. And then, of course, we have climate change and the ways in which people are thinking about sustainable manufacturing. All of that brings a tremendous amount of change and opportunity for manufacturers. And behind it, we have one of the most significant policy moments for U.S. manufacturing. If you saw the recent passage of the infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, and the IRA, all of that essentially represents the most significant investment in our industrial base in possibly since post-World War II. Estimates right now that there will be about over $3 trillion invested in a combination of renewable energy, semiconductors, et cetera. So all of that is very exciting, and I can tell you from Washington, we felt like this was an incredible achievement. But once I left Washington last fall, I started focusing on how do we land the plane? How are we actually going to make this transformation happen? And today's panel is all about that. What is happening on the front line in terms of operations and operational challenges for companies that are in the manufacturing space today? And we have a fantastic panel that represents large established companies, a medium-sized growing company, and a startup to talk about what are the operational challenges of today that they're thinking about and facing, and how are they addressing these right now. So let me have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some discussion and then open up for Q&A. So why don't we start with Audrey? Audrey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Audrey Vandycastle. I am the Director of Digital Transformation for Stanley Black Decker. My team deploys Tulip, among other softwares, and a little bit of hardware onto the plant floors of our manufacturing and distribution centers globally.
Great. And Amar?
My name is Amar. I am General Manager of Print Farm Automations at Formlabs. We have a large-scale print farm with producing 4,000 parts a month for internal needs, and we're responsible for building systems and automations to see how efficient we can build that print farm so that our production is as efficient as possible, and then we can show our customers how we can do that.
Great. And Nico?
For those of you who don't know me, I'm pretty much just some kid who graduated high school 2 years ago. My name's Nico Polcaro, and I'm a production tech at Inkbit, trying to make manufacturing scale 3D printers.
Fantastic. So a lot of both experience and perspectives across these three dimensions. And so I've asked each of them to talk a little bit about, what do you see as your near-term challenges in operations? What are you thinking about? So let's start with Audrey. As someone who's trying to digitalize the supply chain, Audrey, what do you see as your near-term challenge?
Yeah, I think that there's, in a company as large and complex as Stanley Black Decker, it's hard to look the same everywhere across our plant floors, right? And that's one of the reasons that we really gravitated towards Tulip, is because it is so flexible. So we're a company that has grown through inorganic growth, right? We buy a lot of companies, and then we do a really bad job at integrating them. So some of our challenges are, how do we look and compare apples to apples across the varying differences of our sites? How can we collect the data in the same way? How can we surface the same KPIs to our site leaders and our pod leaders above them so that we can know, are we winning or losing the day, the shift, the hour, the minute, whatever it might be. And so being able to capture that shop floor data and harness it to really drive decisions is really where my team is squarely focused on, because that's where we see the most impact and uplift in our operations.
And so what have been like the strategies for you about how do you bring this technology on? Like, what are some of the key factors to doing that?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, starting close to the process and making sure that there is a voice of the customer almost, but really enabling the frontline operators, right? So making sure that the people that are doing the process day in and day out have a voice and a say in what solution is getting built for them, right? Or maybe even building the solutions for themselves, because they know the problems better than me or my team ever could. We're here to help you if you need to go to a level that you can't engineer yourself. But I really think empowering those folks on the front line, on the shop floor, with a digital tool that they can make a difference themselves with is a really key success factor in making sure that what you're deploying digital is actually successful and adopted at the site. Adoption's a big issue for shiny tools, right? There's a lot of buzzwords, there's a lot of softwares out there that sell a dream but don't actually see it in reality, right? And so we find that a lot of our operators are in tune to that and they can smell it from a mile away, right? So really putting that tool into their hands, giving them the power, for us has been a big key to unlocking that adoption and usage of digital tools in our facilities.
It's really interesting because what you're describing is very human-centric, more so than machine-centric, right? And I think we've had sort of extremes on both, and I think the ideal, and of course Natan sort of promotes this as well, is how do we find something that combines both and actually brings the best of the technology with the best of the workers. Are there other factors that I know at one point you talked about, process first and the way you fund all of this?
Yeah, I think that paying attention to the process is really key, right? So my larger organization is a continuous improvement organization, right? So there's process nerds in my organization who really...
There are probably none of those here,
right?
No process nerds.
They really want to get to the process, and one of the mantras is we aren't going to automate waste, right? We don't want to automate a process that's a bad process to begin with. So oftentimes we'll want to look at the process as a whole before we just say, oh yeah, we'll smack a Tulip app on it, right? How can we actually make this process better by turning it digital? How can we make it go faster by going digital? So keeping in mind on that process and how to lean out your processes in 2023 means using digital tools, right? But I think that that's a really critical way to have a significant impact on your operations, is fixing the broken processes as well.
Interesting, yeah. Amar, let's talk about what you're seeing. Mm-hmm. Formlabs is about 10 years old. Mm-hmm. You are, I'm sure, dealing with some of the issues that Audrey's talking about, but at a different scale, at the scale of a sort of small to medium-sized company. What I know, at one point we talked and you were saying, well, this off-the-shelf software for the small and medium-sized firms, not always ideal, doesn't always kind of work for you. That, they focus on traceability, mm-hmm. but not on the shop floor usability. Mm. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think there are operations and process nerds on the panel. Please.
Yeah.
But Formlabs, one of the things that we're trying to do is with additive manufacturing and 3D printing, it is all about the customization, which means each production part is different. And to enable agility and speed and flexibility, we're trying to prove the small batch theory works. Small batch theory means like we're running as small a batch as possible, and that kind of works well for us because our printers are desktop prosumer printers that are small batch size. What that means is that there are a lot of touches on the ground. Many of the kind of off-the-shelf systems that we try to use and look at are very focused on the Internet of Things, in the sense of, oh yeah, I have all these things that are super cool and I can track all the machines. And when we ask, like, okay, so what happens when the build or the parts is not connected to the machine? And the answer usually was, oh, well, click, click, open the window, click, click, drop down menus, click, click, and you've lost me, right? Like you're way too many clicks beyond what we need, especially at a high volume and a high build. And kind of in the environment we're trying to prove, right? We need the ability to standardize and empower and minimize the amount of work that the frontline operators are doing in that sense. So we want to make sure that they are getting all the information they need. We're collecting all the information that we need while minimizing the amount of screen touches or clicks that they are doing that are effectively non-value add. So we do use Tulip for that purpose, and it's kind of that's how we landed on that, and we build on top of that a lot of systems ourselves.
And how receptive are you finding the frontline workers to your approach?
They're very receptive and engaged, and they're always engaged in it and receptive, and it's always more about a kind of finding the right balance of between standardized process driven down from the engineers versus what they kind of found to work for them, right? And finding that right balance and putting it into the system. That's kind of one part, and the other part is building a system that is operators are going to find the easiest path that they're working through, right? And we want to build a system that is enabling them to improve the process, because that's how the process naturally improves. But at the same time, building a system that doesn't become obsolete every week because the operators find a way around it, right? So it's a very fine balance of how much more rules and processes you make and how much you give them room to make a decision or build the system knowing that they may do this one time or may not do this the one time, and you say you accept that as an okay part of the process. And that's an iterative process that you work through it over and over again with the team.
Audrey, you're nodding a lot. What Amar is saying. What's your?
I think that's part of why we love Tulip so much is when we notice an operator's changing their process, right? We can adapt for it, and I think that the power of Tulip as an interface to reduce clicks speaks to me, right? That's one of our big use cases is I don't use this software, not Tulip, insert any software name here, because there's too many clicks for me to do what I need to do. I don't want to go through all the menus, I got to fill out all these forms, right? So cool, we'll smack a Tulip interface on top of it, talk to the platform for you, operator, and now you just have to click 2 things and scan a barcode, right? So I think that simplification allows for operators to really engage and adopt the solution a lot better.
Absolutely.
And you've also found operators to be receptive, largely receptive?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think there's always a little bit of fear with technology that, like Big Brother,
right?
You're going to spy on me, you're going to use this to retaliate against me or anything like that. But I think that we can address that pretty easily. Just, hey, use it for a week and see that I'm not going to come bother you about it other than that you're not using it, right? I think that it's an easy fear for people to have, but it's also an easy one for them to get over pretty quickly.
That's an interesting thing. I'd like to come back to that in a minute, but before we do that, I want to turn to Nico, and I think before we get into your experience at Inkbit, I would love you to say a little bit about the program you were in the Medford Vocational Training School. It was really a fantastic story.
Sure, yeah. 2 years ago, I graduated from Medford Vocational Technical High School, which is a hybrid high school and vocational school program. So I was there for robotics and engineering. And for 3 of my 4 years at high school, I spent half my days learning CAD, programming, and robotics and engineering.
And so I think this is the program of the future for Massachusetts and for the country as a whole, that we just need to be, accelerating these types of programs. The program in Medford has 60 students total over the high school. Imagine we could double or triple that, and I think we'd actually see the demand for it, and I think we also will see that the students coming out who are so well trained, like Nico, start to drive actually digitalization, and they start to the supply helps drive the demand toward upgrading and upskilling on technology. So I think it's a really exciting story. So Inkbit, 5-year-old startup working in the 3D printing space. When you think about the challenges you have right now, you work on post-processing. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you do on the floor and what you see as some of the challenges going forward.
Yeah, so at Inkbit, what we need to do is track parts we print from before we print them to when we ship them to the customer. And because of the platform, it has a pretty large build volume, so we can mix and match orders in that space. And when they get all mixed up, it's pretty difficult to separate them again later, which is why we started using Tulip in the first place. We have this orders, suborders, plates, and sets structure. And we use that to break apart orders, put them onto plates to print them in the most efficient way, and then separate them out again back into their orders and ship them. And recently I've started doing all the Tulip developments in Inkbit, and it's been super useful for that, and also really useful to be very adaptable, because what I was doing 2 weeks ago is not the same thing I'm doing now. And being able to change that with Tulip is super, super useful to be adaptable as we learn new things and figure out better ways to do everything.
And so when you look ahead and say, what would be your next step, or your the thing that you'd like to take forward, what's the challenge you see ahead?
Coming up, I think the challenge is adding a little more structure. We've had a lot of these really informal processes trying to just get things done. And now we need to bring some structure and track those and make sure that everything that's supposed to happen is happening.
And do you see more technology, automation, other things as a solution there?
Absolutely, yeah. As soon as we're done here, I'm going to go back and keep working on the Tulip app to do that.
And when you are, when you think about, automation of your system, which is very customized, and as you say, high variability, relatively low volume, are you in a position to kind of bring in the technology, acquire the things you need for that next phase?
Somewhat. I have a lot of support that helps do it, but it's not me personally.
Right. Okay. And so automation is part of the future, but not necessarily a barrier in your mind?
I think so. I mean, like Audrey was saying, you don't want to automate something that's poor, but I would like to see more automation when it makes sense, like the right thing to do versus getting it done.
Right, right. What about that topic about automation in general for all of you? I mean, that's what we hear about how, first of all, companies really looking for ways to do this. Secondly, when I think about how the U.S. competes in advanced manufacturing, automation is a key part of it, along with training workers and quality jobs. That's how we actually reshore. All of this discussion about reshoring supply chains is not about bringing what's working in China to the States. It's about changing the way we do things and bringing them to the States through new technologies, through automation. Amar, what are you seeing on the horizon for you all?
I mean, I think the major issue I see with automation, so there's kind of the software side aspects of things, but when I think of automation, I think of the physical workflow and the physical machinery. And I think it's very easy to go out and get a big machine that does that one thing, hundreds of thousands, there's a lot of it, right? But there's no two production lines that are alike, right? And there are a lot of small components that can fit together to make the automation. And I generally think the biggest challenge is that the components exist. The biggest challenge is having the enough of the right trained, skilled people that can put these together in many places, right? And when you find those, it shouldn't be a unicorn that is able to kind of you need kind of the right balance of someone who can look at the workflow, understand it, but also kind of help put a few automation pieces together. I'm not saying they don't exist. The skill doesn't exist. It exists, but I do think to advance the automation agenda further across all sizes of companies, we need more of that skill set to enable all sizes of companies be able to implement such automations and not make it very strict and unique and limited to the large production lines, the large companies, the large use cases. And I think, yeah, the components exist. It's just the skill set of putting them together and making them, customizing them to the right size is the skill we need for the future.
So that's interesting because we actually, a colleague of mine at MIT, Ben Armstrong, has done some great work that essentially talks about, we continually get concerned that we don't have the right skill set in the United States for workers, but that the virtuous cycle is in fact when companies adopt new technology, they upskill workers. So what you're describing is, when we have a workforce that actually has advanced skills, they can then figure out the automation or the new technology that we're bringing in, and that becomes the virtuous cycle versus one in which we do not invest in the technology, we do not get the skill set we need, we keep, a lower wage, kind of equilibrium, if you will. Audrey, what's your experience with automation and?
Yeah, I mean, even in a large company, automation is hard and a lot of times cost prohibitive, right? I think skill set is one angle, but I also think, I'm thinking about one of our shops down in Tennessee that has equipment from the 1930s, literally mills and fluters from the 1930s making Irwin taps, and robotic welding systems welding compressors together, right? In the same shop floor, right? How do you connect that? How do you make those things work together, and how do you get that data in the same ecosystem? There's 4 different types of PLCs, they're all proprietary, right? We can't connect them together, we can't talk to each other, right? So I think that there's also a lot of these integration challenges and proprietary silos that if we really want manufacturing to be the competitive advantage the United States to United States-based manufacturers, those silos have to go away, because I don't want to have a Rockwell license and an Allen Bradley license and all of these licenses that I have to pay for, and my system still can't work together, right? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for automation, but I think going back to the kind of fear that I was talking about before, at least in Stanley Black & Decker sites, y'all don't have to worry for a long time about robots replacing jobs, right? So right. I think that, and what we really see automation for is, how do we augment our workers and how do we take them out of situations that we don't want them to be in, right? I'm thinking too, there's a wrench facility that we have down in Texas where an operator used to have to bend down and pick up these big billets and load them into a lathe. Dangerous, hard on your back work. We replaced it with a robot. And we didn't fire the person that was doing that. They're doing something else in the plant now, right? And now their back doesn't hurt every day when they go home, right? So that's the kind of use cases that we're finding for automation, but it's definitely not, there's no blanket automation, super automated factories within our space, even as a large manufacturer, because it's complex. It's a big problem to solve.
And I listen to you, and what I hear, and by the way, it's music to my ears, is that what you're saying is we really would benefit to standardize across a lot of the hardware and the software.
Yeah.
And it would really be, that's the first step before you have your integrated and connected Tennessee factory between the 1930s and the modern technology. That's a very, that's an area that I think as a country, we should be having more conversations about. Whether it's being driven by the private sector, whether it's being driven by the public sector, but can we really make this kind of digitalization, this digital leap without that kind of step forward? I don't know, Amar, do you have an opinion on this idea of standardizing across hardware?
Formlabs has some proprietary stuff, right? So
right.
Yeah, it kind of is a bigger conversation, I guess, on the economy and I don't know how do you create an economy and how do you create policies that allows those to interact and standardize those machinery. But the one thing I want to say as audio was speaking, I just kind of thought about something is when I worked at Boeing, there was a culture that I think is very common in American manufacturing, that is kind of the heroics of the frontline operators, right? There's a huge pride in American manufacturing, which is fantastic, but that leads to these kind of culture of heroism of this is my station, and occasionally we would call it like this is it's not an assembly line, it's a craft, it's a cockpit by craftsmanship, right? And safety is a huge one, and even though safety was a huge part, there was a part of there was a component that required some vinyl sticky parts, and operators would go through carpal tunnel surgeries over and over again, and they were themselves refusing kind of assistance on automation and on that culture of change. So I do think there is kind of on that front line, and there's an aspect of, culturally speaking, the path forward with the American manufacturing, with the people, is not an American heroism. It's not about like just that hero saving the day. It's more about collectively as a system, as a process, we're able to achieve what we need.
Yeah.
And that's how I tie it back to individual, different platforms connect to each other that now we can't, because they're all licensed and proprietary.
That's right.
It's a good connection, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, when we bring in the technology, the data analytics, the ability to improve safety and quality and all of that, those who are on the front lines and have heroically been saving the day when something goes wrong, ideally, they're not doing that anymore because things are going right most of the time. And so it does it means a change in mindset about what somebody's role really is and where they're adding value to the process. And I know that's something that we've talked about in our research with companies, where you're really trying to get a mindset shift in all of this new move toward digitalization, and it requires a mindset shift right from management down to the shop floor. Everybody's got to, shift in that mindset. Nico, you are the new mindset. You're not dealing with any of this, some of this legacy operation. When you hear, this concern about the robots are coming for people's jobs, and workers are going to be at risk if we bring in this technology, did that ever resonate with you? You're obviously in a robotics program, and you're now in a startup that's looking to, bring in as much technology as possible. How do you think about that dialogue? That's certainly been, if anybody remembers, I think this was in 2019 Super Bowl, every single commercial had a robot in it, serving you a beer, whatever they were doing. Like, the robots were coming, and they're coming for your jobs. What's your take, having just come out of this program? Is that a sort of old mindset?
I think it definitely is. Like, hearing you guys say operators are resistant or worried about this seems ridiculous. Like, I couldn't imagine that. I can't wait for the robots to take my job so I can do something more useful.
There we go.
There's the mindset shift.
I've been
There's the
asking for
mindset
years.
shift. We might not put you with the older generation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what
But maybe you need to.
That's what's so exciting about being in a younger generation, is that, no offense, that the mindset's going to be different when 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's going to be a no-brainer for us to use a tool like Tulip or like a robot. We're not going to try and build something on an Access or Excel spreadsheet, because we have better tools available to us, and our mindset isn't scared of those type of things, right? So I think you're totally right. You said at the beginning, it's a super exciting time because there is so much energy and innovation in this space. And then 10, 20 years from now, when all of the young people are in charge, right, it's going to be a whole different world. It's pretty exciting.
So when I have been out talking to some of these large automotive firms, for example, they would say their ideal worker has the domain knowledge of the older workers, really understand what's going on under the hood, with the sort of flexibility and facile comfort with technology of the younger
Yeah.
generation, and to combine both of those. Is that something both of you see in your work, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely like veterans that we see in our sites that have that deep institutional knowledge, but then I'll also hear in our sites, well, this is what the SOP says, but this is how we really do it. And it's like, why are those two things different, right? Like, I think that's an area that technology can really help in streamlining and standardizing. But I do think that I hear where those automakers are coming from in that regard. It's can't have the best of both worlds, but it would be nice.
I mean, I think I'm gonna take that to a little extreme, right? Like we shouldn't expect, we shouldn't expect every operator to be able to look at the code behind a software and be able to read it, right? And that's kind of what I mean by usability on the floor, right? So we have to set the right expectation of what do we expect from our operators, right? Are they kind of continuous improvement, trying to troubleshoot and try to understand where the process is going wrong, or are they running the automations in the machines? And are those skill sets, do these skill sets bridge over each other? Yes, 100%. And we need, that's kind of what I mentioned is we need a lot more, skilled labor in terms of, and educated in terms of being able to combine those two and being able to be on the floor and combine those two. But I do think we have to have a little bit more expectation setting on what do we expect, and we can't have a production line, full of, the super, that defies expectation of being able to run a production line, then pull up the laptop and do some coding, right? And I'm being a little extreme here, but the point is, I think we have to be realistic with the expectations of what we expect and design around it and work with that. And the more skill sets we have available, the more we can be flexible, of course, but that's kind of where my head at.
Let's talk a little bit about lessons learned, maybe given, efforts to bring in digitalization and, what has actually worked for you at all these different sites. Audrey?
Yeah, I think, one of the big lessons learned is having a site champion, right? Having someone that gets the message, gets the vision, maybe has the technical skill set, or at least knows how to gather the right technical skill sets into the room. We found that with any digital tool that we're deploying, it takes that site buy-in. I can throw as many tools at you as I want, but if there's not people there at the site who are willing to be early adopters, to be your site champion, I think that's such a critical part of the process. And that's one of the ways that we've found our sites that have transformed the most have super strong site champions, right? So that's like a really critical part of it. And I think that empowering those site champions and taking some stuff off of their plates, right? Like, my team will deal with IT for you, so you don't have to talk to IT. Go do what you need to do, and we'll handle that, right? So also site champion, but also then centralizing some of the administration and governance and tedious tasks that can wear on a site and are repetitive, that at scale we can do it a lot quicker and easier, and let you focus on what you need to do. I think those are two real keys to successful enablement of transformation in a site.
I'm just curious, you have so many factors. I can't remember how many you have around the country. Have you gone through, have you kind of done a sweep across all of these, or where do you stand in the process?
No, I wish. We have maybe 150 different locations globally, definitely a smaller subset of that in the United States. But we've got sites that are just at the very beginning of their maturity curve, still doing everything on paper, to sites that are almost nearly or fully end-to-end digitized, right, process-wise. So it really runs the gamut. And then we have some sites that my team hasn't even touched yet, right? We're a small team, mighty team, but it's a lot of sites to get to. So
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. We know what's going to keep you busy for the near future.
Yep.
What about lessons learned for you, Amar? What you had talked at one point about sort of right-sizing technology and things.
Yeah. First, I do totally agree with you. Kind of the a system is a pathway of connected activities, right? And if you set up the expectation of one team doing this and the other team doing that, and how do they bridge? And that's kind of quite important. The right sizing the technology and right timing the technology is extremely, I've found in kind of in every transformation, in every digital transformation or manufacturing transformation has been extremely key. If you build too much technology, you're either wasting money, wasting time, or setting yourself on a path that you don't know what it is, and you're kind of tying yourself up too early. And if you don't build enough, you find yourself behind the curveball. And I do think the right sizing and the right timing is a really kind of critical decision that is not given its fair share of appreciation.
And how do you get there? Is it an iterative process, or is it better to sort of err on the conservative side? I think about Tesla, when people remember when they essentially automated their first production facility and it wasn't working because it had too many robots and not enough people. Like how would you approach that problem?
I think the most important thing is to find a way to eliminate biases and excitement towards new shiny things, right? Because that's usually what create biases that blinds from the right decision, right? That's usually what the biggest one that is we have to be careful for. And that's kind of just having the right decision-making process and making sure there is the right voices, the right diversity, the right voices in the room when these decisions are made, to try to eliminate that bias, because it happens, right? I'm not above it. No one is above that. Like there's, a new technology is super cool, excited about. It's like trying to find a way to fit it in, but then someone else looks at it. You're like, I don't see it, right?
Right.
And kind of having the right decision process will eliminate that. But then fundamentally is having the right kind of business decision of return on investment and value, and that's kind of table stakes, I would say. But on top of that is eliminating the biases.
That's a great point. And actually, the way you get there, as you said, is you have a diverse team around the table looking at the problem, right? Trying to eliminate the initial bias. Now, this might be a tough question, Nico, for you. Like lessons learned. You've been on site for 2 years, and you're doing the post process at Inkbit. Are there things you've learned about your operational challenges that even like how you the process for fixing a problem, or how you engage other teammates in this? Anything that you've picked up in the last 2 years that you're going to take forward with you?
Definitely. Before I do that, I want to jump back to something you said real quick about expecting operators to jump off the production line and open a laptop and start programming. I don't think that's an unreasonable skill set to have, because I have that skill set, and all of my classmates have that skill set. And I think that that's exactly where we're going to be going in the future. Like you said, when vocational programs like this become more common.
Yeah.
But back to lessons learned, I think always ask the operator for input in what you're making. Like even before I was doing the Tulip development, I had the biggest say in it of anybody at the company, because I'm the person who has to use it, and then I can ask for what I want to make things run smoother, make it more usable, make it more practical to have in the factory floor.
Fantastic. This is really, I think, the vision for the future for advanced manufacturing and manufacturing in the country. We have a few minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience, anyone who wants to, or comments. I bet there's a lot of experience and interest in this audience. If people want to comment on operational challenges, or maybe not. I was going to say something about U.S. manufacturing policy, but I only want to hear good things about that. So, any comments or questions from anyone in the audience? Yes.
So I was just kind of thinking through the higher level and lower level as we're going.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Philip. I actually work with Nico. I'm the director of operations over at Inkbit. But I've been kind of thinking through, because Nico and I are the ones who put our heads together to try to figure out, how we move forward with kind of organizing our operation. But I'm thinking about highly efficient processes. So you've got your ideal kind of theoretical space. This is what should work, or these set of processes should work, and this is the most efficient. And then on this side, you have highly efficient teams, right? And so they hit their metrics or exceed them. They just work very well together. They communicate, the vibe is right, whatever. But there's not necessarily always that overlap. So I'm trying to think of kind of how do you, as a company, how do you reconcile that when you've got an amazing team and they're just knocking it out of the park, but it's not really aligning with what you see as an efficient kind of process or vision for how something has to happen? I'm kind of curious as to your take.
Interesting. Audrey?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, an interesting challenge. I think that I'm trying to relate it to maybe a similar challenge or team that we've had. I think that we have a lot of, here's a good example. We have a lot of sites that will go rogue, buy their own software, do it their own way, right? Cool, you guys are killing it, but also, do I trust the numbers that you're giving me, right? I don't know, maybe you can pencil whip on this software. And is it integrated with the rest of our supply chain? No, right? So I think that you have to find that the reason or the problem or the value prop for them to adhere to your standards. And if you don't have a value prop, your standard's wrong, right? If the right way to do something is not what your high performing team does, you need to look what your high performing team does and adopt that as a standard potentially, right? So I think that the way that you approach it, maybe they have a best practice that you haven't identified, right? Bringing them into that conversation. Hey, look, we have this standard, but it's not what you guys are doing, and we're really curious how you reach these numbers without following our standard, right? I think that bringing them along for the ride, probably a good way to approach it.
Interesting.
Definitely agree, and it's not only because I'm on that team, but
Or just get more Nikos,
Yeah.
right?
but
Right. You don't go rogue, though.
well,
Not yet.
I think if you like at Inkbit, there's not as much structure as a lot of other places. So that means people are left to their own devices, and like a lot of the time I'm given goals. This needs to be done by now, and however you do that, it happens. So, and if you're doing that over and over again, people get really good at figuring out the best way to do something. Mm-hmm. And if that isn't giving you everything you need to show them the bigger picture and say, this is accomplishing your goals really well, but it might not be collecting all the data you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Amar, did you have anything you wanted to add to this topic?
I
Before we
mean,
wrap up?
you kind of said a couple words that are a little bit of trigger words for me because, having the whole company on the same system is not the goal. Having alignment on visibility and transparency of the data and alignment on the processes is the goal, right? And the reason I'm emphasizing that is, one of the example challenges we're running into is that, Formlabs, the facility we have is kind of the first really, in-house production facility we're running. And, working with the rest of the team, they're like, well, you have to use the ERP system there. I was like, well, but the ERP system is not set up for a production facility, right? Like I can't shoehorn it, right? Like, so I would have, so we kind of step back and look at it like, all right, what are you trying to do, right? Like, is your goal just for me to use it, or what is the goal? And we kind of strip it down to the goal, and it's basically an ERP is the chart of account, and you need auditability and traceability there. So like, how do we achieve that while achieving my operations requirement is the goal. And I might have different requirements, but I need to be able to achieve the mothership's goals at the same time. So that's, just kind of elaborating on that a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds, we're talking a little bit about some top-down view, but also some bottom-up, flexibility and view that come together. That was a great question. Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap up and help me thank our panelists today. Nico, Amar, and Audrey. Thank you.